Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and after a Christmas break, we are back. 2023 was the worst year for mainstream movies that I have ever experienced, and 2024 is probably going to be even worse, but we'll have another video talking about that very soon. But for now, I want to go through all of the movies that I saw in theaters in 2023 and rank them and talk about the ones that I really liked and the ones that I really hated. But to be honest, I went through this list and I made it, and it was really hard to rank the movies, but I just realized there are so few movies this year that I would really put on a top list. And even then, even the movies that I enjoyed had a lot of drawbacks. There are but 2 movies released this year that I have seen so far that I would say don't have any major drawbacks to them. It's just been such a horrendous year for mainstream movies. And mind you, I'm saying mainstream movies because that's what this list is mostly going to be comprised of. There are a lot of indie films and awards films that I haven't seen yet because they cost like $20 to watch, to rent them on Apple TV. And so I haven't seen those yet, so this is mainly going to be about the mainstream movies that I've seen. But without further delay, let's go through them and just rank them and see what we get. Now, there's going to be some films on here that I've already reviewed, and my opinion might have changed a little bit since I reviewed them, so this is to re-clarify my thoughts. And there's also a few films on this list that I did not review at all, so this is where I can talk about what I felt about them. So the worst film that I've seen all year is The Flash. I absolutely despise this movie. It was the absolute worst experience I've had in the theater this year. And I have seen a lot of bad movies, let me tell you. But The Flash was the most miserable experience. It was gross. It was annoying. It went on forever. I felt uncomfortable throughout the entire thing because some of the jokes went across the line so far, like into nudity and stuff. And I absolutely did not need that from Ezra Miller of all people. I just remember feeling so uncomfortable watching this film. I could not believe that they tried to market it as some sort of the greatest superhero movie of all time. This film really broke me, and it made me had to take a break from going to the theater because of how much I disliked this film. And some people get mad at me for calling The Flash the trash or The Flash the flush, but honestly, that's how I feel about it. And the reason why it gets under my skin so much, once again, is because they tried to promote it as the greatest superhero movie of all time. Now, I can take having a bad movie, and we're going to go through a lot of bad movies on this list, but it's when you try to fool the audience, you try to dupe the audience into thinking this was something that they knew it wasn't. There was no way that they thought this film was that great. They were just trying to salvage it, and I just really hate that. So that is why The Flash is by far the worst movie I have seen all year. But this should not be outdone by a movie that comes next on my list that I actually kept forgetting was even released this year, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Once again, I just keep forgetting that this movie was released. I mean, it's got all the fixings of what Marvel has become now. Scott Lang's character is assassinated as somebody who's really high on himself all of a sudden, as if his motivations haven't always been towards his family, but his family just treats him like garbage throughout this movie. All to prop up Cassie, who is a completely different character once again. She now becomes a criminal activist, and for some reason, while Scott did things similarly, breaking the law in order to right wrongs, now for some reason when Cassie does it, it's okay. A little bit similarly to The Flash, it just goes into some gross out humor that I really, really hated, but also its villain is just so disappointing, Kang, and now he's gone, but such a disappointing villain. This is like the second time we get to see him defeated with ease. It's just a really nonsensical, really depressing, really awful film. But I think the reason why I'm putting it above The Flash is I keep forgetting it just altogether, and so it would be better if I forget a bad film than if it sticks with me forever. So Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, second worst film of the year. But the third worst film of the year is another superhero film, The Marvels. Now, this movie is best described as a bunch of TikTok clips spliced together. The editing is terrible. You could tell that this was just a Frankenstein version of a movie that they knew was going to be bad, so they tried to make it as sporadic and fast-paced as possible. It really shows the culmination of just how bad Captain Marvel's character is, how we don't really have much of an emotional connection to her, and while there's little signs of what they could have done with her, they never go forward with it. It's like they still don't want to give this character deep flaws. It always has to be stuff that we can brush over. The fact that she essentially got brought a world into a civil war and that she destroyed it with her overconfidence should have been a really turmoil within her. Yet it's just something that's revolved within 5 minutes. The villain, I couldn't even remember who it was. The tone is all over the place. It's a comedy, it's a drama, it's a campy 1960s Batman comedy. There's singing, there's action, there's pretty much everything. It's a hodgepodge film. However, for just a little bit there, it had a so bad it's good kind of feel to it. And to just get even some entertainment from that makes it better than The Flash and Ant-Man and the Wasp, because I got absolutely no entertainment from that. But I didn't get any entertainment from this next movie, which is the 4th worst on my list, The Little Mermaid. These Disney remakes are so awful. They are so boring. Boring is the word that I must use with all of them, because they don't do anything new or creative on their own. They just recreate the originals as worse versions. In this case, one of the things that made it worse is how long they made it. They just padded out this film for so long. For the few things that are additions to the story, it was just horrible songs. And while I know some people were like really excited to see Eric and Ariel, I just feel that this is a prime example of Disney feeling very squeamish about doing those kind of romances in their princess movies. So it just felt really stiff to me. So yeah, this just makes me just... Please stop making Disney remakes. They're just so awful. They're like everything wrong with mainstream entertainment today. There's just like no creativity. There's no logic of how to really make the movie and make it engaging. And my goodness, there's just so many bad movies to get through. I saw Shazam! Fury of the Gods. When I think of this movie and the main thing wrong with it, I think of Zachary Levi. I don't understand why, when he's playing a character who's supposed to be 18 years old and he transforms into Shazam, he plays him up like he is... and he's just constantly talking in this really dumb 4-year-old kind of voice, and that's not who the character is supposed to be, but that's who you're supposed to root for. Even though they sent him on an arc of growth in the first movie, he just feels like a complete child in this one, and it's so confusing. But that's kind of the only thing that really stands out, because the rest of the plot is just so incredibly generic. There's nothing memorable about the villains or the plot or the fight scenes. It's all like anything that you've ever seen before in a superhero movie for the past 30 years is in this movie. It's just incredibly forgettable, and it did not need to be made. The first Shazam was fine, but it really did not need a sequel. It didn't do that well, so that's why it's so low on the list. And next is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a movie that I refused to see, and honestly, that was because of how bad word of mouth was around it, and because I had just seen The Flash, and I just could not stand another one of these movies. But I did eventually go see it weeks and weeks later, and with Indiana Jones, I think the real problem with this is James Mangold, the director, because Steven Spielberg is the director of the original Indiana Jones films, and he always brings like an old-timey Hollywood optimism and fun to his films. James Mangold, who has before done Logan, is the exact opposite of that. He does gritty things, he does depressing things, and that was what really stood out to me when this movie began. It's like really gritty and depressing, but then they'll have the like nice Indiana Jones theme play, and it was just a complete clash. There's the argument that this movie bombed because it just appeals to an older audience, and when I went and saw it, it was mainly older people in the theater. But I also think that no one wanted to see a broken down Indiana Jones. Once again, Indiana Jones was like a light, fun adventure thing. And oh my goodness, I'm gonna say this about a lot of movies, but it was so long, because you're watching a bad movie, you're not really into what they're doing with the characters, not what they're doing with the tone, and then it just goes on forever. It does try to redeem the character of Indiana Jones at the end and try to have a character arc for him, but it overall is just such a slog. I would never watch it again. And yeah, we are now 6 movies into the bad movies of the year, but now number 7 is Blue Beetle. This is another DC superhero movie. Superhero movies have just gotten so bad. Blue Beetle, it was very, very clear that it was supposed to be a streaming movie. It seems like that in every level, from the writing to how it looks. I'm a big fan of the lead actor of this movie, but he is not given very much here. I think it would have been a lot better if this movie was at the bare minimum, just like the Spider-Man story, just DC's version of Spider-Man, which is actually what Blue Beetle, the Jaime Reyes version was supposed to be. But what really brought down the film for me is his family. The fact that he had just such an annoying family, but that was made central. They tried to integrate them into the plot, making them try to rescue him, but they were just so annoying, but they were so latched to him on every level. And the plot was once again generic villain and resolution, but I just think that Blue Beetle was a film that didn't even need to be made, and it only was made because of DC shenanigans behind the scenes where they originally wanted to promote HBO Max with it, and then they moved it to theaters because they didn't want DC stuff to be on HBO Max anymore. So another terrible film, and it just should not have come out. Oh my goodness, this year has been so bad for movies. Number 8, The Creator. Now, this movie is one that I had high hopes for. When I first saw the trailer, I'm like, oh great, another evil AI movie, another Terminator. When I saw the trailer for this, I was like, I want this to be a movie that I think is going to be so good that I can come out of and just spread the word to everyone about how good it is and that everyone should go see it. And, sort of like how Everything Everywhere All at Once got that traction. Then I saw it, and my goodness, The Creator is such a slog. The central problem with it is it's meant to be about the characters and this family of relationships which they never well develop. They never develop the main relationship with the protagonist and this character who he was married to. We never get to see how they got together, which is very important to the script, as that's kind of what everything hinges on. And they do not develop the main relationship with the protagonist and the child well either. It's like, I'll watch a scene where it's them supposed to be bonding, and it's like, did I miss something? Because there's been absolutely nothing leading up to this emotional moment. This movie does not deal with the idea of evil AI, though it deals with the idea of what if AI was good? What if AI was better than us? And that's a great idea, except for it never expands on it. Why is AI better than us in this universe? It presents us with the idea, but it doesn't expand on it or develop it like anything in this movie. And this is what I'm gonna talk about this more in a video, but I get really frustrated when people are like, why don't people go to original films anymore? And I'm like, well, the original films we get on a mainstream level these days aren't great either. And this is a good example of that. So that's why The Creator is so low on my list. Just a little bit higher than Creator, I would put Wish. Even though the more I think about Wish, the more I think it might be one of the worst Disney movies ever made because of the potential that this film had and because of what it became. The animation is absolutely horrible. Nothing that they tried to do with the animation worked. It looked like 3D animation with maybe a 2D filter over it. And so we lost all the detail of 3D, but we don't have the charm of 2D animation either. There are so many things in this movie, like during the songs, there's no creativity with what you're portraying during a song sequence. They literally just portray Asha walking around during the big I Want song in this movie. It was probably the worst soundtrack I've ever heard, one of the lamest villains. Asha, who is basically just everything that Disney has been doing with their princesses for years in one character. There is nothing new or fresh about her. The only reason why it's a bit higher than The Creator, because there was a little moment there during the song At All Costs, which I talked about before, where I felt something for the film, and I felt that there was something there. But that is very tragic, because while there could have been something to this movie, if you go and see the original plans for it, they just made it into the absolute forgettable thing that it is. And just a bit higher than Wish is Wonka, and this movie did better at the box office than people expected. It had people praising it more than expected. I honestly wasn't into it. I kind of liked seeing a musical again, just because they're so rare these days. I know I just talked about 2 movies that were, but I mean, apart from Disney, I kind of liked seeing one of these traditional musicals again. There were a couple of the songs that I actually liked. I think that Timothée Chalamet does the best that he can with what he's given. I kind of liked seeing him in a different role. But my main problem with this film was the tone that they were going for, and maybe it just wasn't for me. The original Willy Wonka really does well with satirizing the real world, and this one just makes it all cartoonish. This makes it so cartoonish that it got to the point where I couldn't believe anything that was happening. Like having a hotel where they scam people to stay there forever because they didn't read the fine print about how they had to pay to go up and down stairs, and the police are totally complacent with it. Yeah, I know, it's the ridiculous tone of the movie, but it just didn't really work for me. There has never been anybody who is able to recreate the charm of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder, and I would say the same for this film, honestly. Next we have Gran Turismo, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about this movie. I went to see it because reviews were saying that it was a lot better than expected, and it's true, it is, but it was still a very, very by-the-numbers racing movie, underdog movie, and it's nice to see one of those again, I guess, but it just it was one of those movies where it's okay to watch it one time, but then you never have to see it again. None of the characters left an impression. Everything that it did in terms of its storytelling was just very by the book. So yeah, you can watch it once if you want, and there were some nice racing scenes, but it wasn't really anything that left a major impression on me. After that on my list, I have Mithrigan, and this was another movie that people told me would be really, really good, and it wasn't. It's a PG-13 horror movie, yes, but even with PG-13, I think you could have done a little more with the scares. There were just no scares in the movie. It's like they didn't have the capability to make any of their jump scares actually scary. And I found the characters in this movie really, really unlikable, so I couldn't root for anybody. So just a really disappointing movie all around. I'm glad that it was somewhat successful for original horror movies, but that's pretty much it. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. Now, I am not a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan. However, this was one of the better films that I've seen this year, and you can tell that we're now getting to the more entertaining and better films on my list. It's really a well-structured film about not belonging and trying to fit in. It developed its characters well. It had some great action by the very end of it. And the animation was very, very distinct. You can tell that they're getting inspiration from Into the Spider-Verse, but it managed to make its own distinct style of animation. It also is kind of crude and all of that, and that's just not for me. So while I can say that it objectively was a really good film and I enjoyed some of the character development, I still don't think that I'm really a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles person. After that is the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and now this movie is different than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because while I think I enjoyed it more, honestly, I think Mario is one of those movies that you can watch once if you're a fan of Mario and have just a great time because of all the references and the Easter eggs and that feeling of playing the games. But it has basically no story, just like the Mario games themselves. And that's why, for me, it just does not give much rewatchability. And I mean, this is what the head of Nintendo wanted, and he made $1 billion off of it, so I guess you can't fault him for that. But I need a movie with a little bit more substance if I'm going to keep coming back to it. So that's why it's higher on the list, but I still don't really think it's good. Speaking of which, there's Elemental, and this is another one of those films that it's not bad, it's just not great. It just does not do anything different than what we haven't seen before. I mean, I kind of wanted to see it because Pixar and Disney have shied away from relationship storylines for so long. I just wanted to see what they would do with this, but every piece of the marketing just made it look like the generic follow your dreams Disney thing that they've done a million times, and rebel against authority and figure out what you want to do. And the movie itself is not that different, and while it's fine to watch, it just doesn't have anything in it that you couldn't get from any other Disney movie, and that's why it's simultaneously so high and so low on the list. And now we get to the movies that I really enjoyed this year, but like I said, most of them come with a lot of drawbacks. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I absolutely loved Rocket's storyline in this movie. However, I just feel that the other Guardians were kind of let down because Rocket's story was just so great. Then Star-Lord, it's like we don't really get much time with him. They really should have just killed off Gamora if they weren't going to do anything with him and with her and Star-Lord again, because bringing her back to life just felt pointless. You could have had a story about him letting go if she wasn't there. Drax, Nebula, everyone else, they get little bits of closure, but they just don't get much focus compared to Rocket. And they kind of end up in places at the end, like with Mantis going away, where I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this, but it did not get much development. It was not as good a finale as it could have been. However, it was the first Marvel movie in years that actually felt like a Marvel movie, that actually had some good action scenes, that actually had something there to the characters that I really liked. So that's why it's so high on the list. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. Now, I was really hyping up this film, and I think that it is a good film. However, there is a major problem with it, and it's a problem of why I think it didn't do so well at the box office, even after they were really hyping it up coming off of Top Gun Maverick. It's because the Mission Impossible franchise has been going on since the 90s, and essentially every movie is the same. And for a while there, they were able to up their game and do something different and exciting and draw people in. But this one especially, like, there's a great train sequence and some great action sequences, and to see practical effects, it's so fun to watch, but it also isn't unlike anything that you've ever seen in a Mission Impossible film before. That's why after seeing it one or twice, I just didn't feel the big desire to really watch it again. And I think that it's really time for this Mission Impossible franchise to be done, which is a shame because this is one of the last movies out there that will really do practical effects like this. Okay, my top 5 movies. You ready for this? Number 5, Hunger Games Battle of Songbirds and Snakes. Some of you may be upset with me for putting this here, but this was my biggest surprise of the year. I thought it was going to be a really bad movie. The book was not that great, but it was a solid film. I liked the performances. The movie is flawed, definitely, but during the Hunger Games battle, seeing the backstory of Capitol and the early days of the Hunger Games, the very, very dark ending, I liked all of it. I would watch it again, honestly. It was not a bad movie to see this year. In fact, it just went to show that most of the movies I saw that I enjoyed anything from were released in the second 6 months of the year. So number 4 on my list is the movie that's given me endless fun and frustration this year. It is Barbie. Now, this is a very, very meta movie, and I think that that's why everyone seems to come out with a very different impression of it. It's doing so much. If you look behind the scenes, they wanted this movie to be a commentary on the doll, a commentary on growing up, a commentary on feminism, a criticism of feminism, talking about feminism of the past, talking about where the Barbie dolls have gone, trying to talk a little bit about the expectations that men feel they can't live up to, trying to also criticize men, all these different things at once. And I think the fact that this movie is doing so much at once might be its biggest problem, and it might be why people just come away with such different impressions of it based on what they pick up on, or maybe even what they read into that wasn't even supposed to be there. For me, the things I like about it, I like the subtext about being a little girl growing up, and that's what Barbie's supposed to be. I love the set design, some of the best set design I've ever seen. I love that little 6-year-old girl feel that first part of the movie gives, and I love the performances from Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. And I think that there's something to be gleaned there in the movie about the theme of you are enough, which apparently was supposed to be the theme of the movie. That's what Ken's storyline is supposed to be about, that he's not supposed to just be desperate for Barbie's approval. And that was apparently what Barbie's story was supposed to be about, but we don't really get to stick the landing at the very end. And I've heard a lot of people say that they just did not like the ending, and I understand that, because after all these grievances with the world are introduced, at the end it doesn't leave you with any answers. I mean, it's supposed to be you should leave the fictional world and be in reality because it's better to live in reality, but after, bringing up thoughts of death and all that, there's not really any answers presented. So Barbie is kind of a movie where half of it is so entertaining and then another half of it is just like kind of a mess. And I think, once again, that is why there's such a rainbow of reactions to it. But I like the parts about it that I like about it. It is a good reminder that we need to have more girly movies like this, but I hope that girly movies in the future can be better. Top 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Like I said, there were pretty much only 2 movies this year that I thought didn't come with major drawbacks, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, unfortunately, is one of the films that comes with major drawbacks. There is just so much to love about this film. The animation, how much effort was put into that. I love Miles' story. I love his chemistry with Gwen. I love Gwen as an original character. I love how the stakes are raised with Spot and what they do with him as a villain. But unfortunately, there's a lot of questionable things in this, like when Miles goes and meets all the different Spider-Men, why Peter B. Parker, why Spectacular Spider-Man, why Penny Parker would want to go along with this plan of being willing to let Miles' father die just to keep the multiverse together, and why they wouldn't question that or anything. I just can't see those characters doing that. But a big problem that I have with this film is the pacing, because the number one criticism that I've seen with anybody who's watched this film is just how slow it is, because you've got an exciting story in there that's really interesting, but it just takes so long to get there because we have scenes that are redundant, we have scenes that go on for too long, and it's very clear that this was meant to be one story that they split, and that is just a huge mistake. So those are the big drawbacks of Across the Spider-Verse, why it's so high on my list, but there's just such big flaws to it. But now for the 2 films that I've been talking about that I think are good, no big drawbacks to them. Number 2 of my list for the entire year is Godzilla -1. This movie surprised me. I did not expect to see a Godzilla movie this good. It really goes back to the roots of the character, all the way back to 1954, when it was treated more seriously as a discussion about atomic weapons and things like that. When I first watched it, I wondered if some scenes got a little slow, but on repeat viewings, no, I love all the scenes. I love the scenes with the human characters. This is the first Godzilla movie or monster movie in general in however long I can remember that I actually cared about the human characters and story, where every human character is well developed. They all have their own individual arcs, even if some get smaller amounts of screen time than others. And Godzilla himself is utilized so well, where he's in the movie actually very little, but when he's there, he looks great, he is legitimately scary, and his presence and destruction is just so well felt. So this almost made my number one movie of the year. But my number one movie of the year, and what I think is the best movie of the year that I've at least seen so far, is Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Now, like some of the movies I've criticized on this list, this is an incredibly long film. But unlike the other movies that I've criticized for being long, this is a long movie with purpose. You're dealing with one of the most important events in history with somebody's entire life. I thought Nolan's unconventional style of switching back and forth through time actually worked through this film, as we get to see so much more of his life at once, and we always are simultaneously exploring points in his life that are relevant to each other. The acting in this film is the best I've seen all year, how everyone is able to capture the cadence of the speech at the time, and how well those actors draw their characters and draw you into the story, and how we're really exploring such a flawed figure that got to feel like he would be responsible for the destruction of the world. And you really get that gravitas of this person who was a pretty awful person, and how his actions weigh on him. I think that it is Christopher Nolan's best film, just below the Dark Knight trilogy. And I really hope Cillian Murphy wins that Oscar. But yeah, most films this year were not good. So, and I don't have a whole lot of hope for 2024, but we'll talk about that later this week. What were your favorite and least favorite movies of 2023? Do you agree with me that it is such a bad year? Well, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.